Welcome, Algebra 2 students, to Lesson 58. We're going to talk about lead coefficients for just a moment. When we have a quadratic equation, say for example 4x squared plus 3x minus 5 equals 0, we say that the coefficient paired with the x squared is what we call a lead coefficient. Okay? So our lead coefficient is the whole number next to the x squared. When we have a quadratic equation that starts off like this, then we have what we call a unity lead coefficient. Mathematicians refer to the invisible one that is always present in front of a variable as unity sometimes, or most of the time. So we call that, in that regard, the unity lead coefficient, and it refers to the invisible one that's right there, that we always know is there. So we're going to call that the unity LC. That's really all we have to talk about with lead coefficients right now. The thing to remember is if we don't have a unity lead coefficient and you have another whole number here, we have to get rid of that whole number before we can complete the square when we have an equation. So for instance, we have in 58.1, we have 4x squared plus 3x minus 3. And that is set equal to 0. And so we need to complete the square. So the steps to completing the square are, first, let's move this over. So 4x squared plus 3x is equal to 3. So when we have this lead coefficient, what we have to do is we have to divide everything by it in order to get rid of it. So we divide this by 4, we divide this by 4, and we divide this by 4. So that leaves us with x squared plus 3x over 4 equals 3 over 4. Now, one of the things that we have to do in order to complete the square is we have to take this middle coefficient and we have to divide it by 2, and then we have to square it. So what we're going to do to divide this fraction by 2, we're just going to multiply it by 1 over 2, and that's going to do the work for us. So over on the side, we're going to say 3 over 4 times 1 over 2, and that's going to be equal to 3 over 8. Right? And then we're going to square that. So 3/8 times 3/8 is going to be 9 over 64. And that is going to be our third term in this square. And when we add that, we say x squared plus 3x over 4 plus 9 over 64. And we have to do the same thing. We have to add it to both sides or else it's no longer equal. So 3/4 plus 9 over 64. So now we're going to make this have the same coefficient, or I'm sorry, the same denominator, so that we can add them together. Right? So we need to make this 64, or we need to find a least common multiple, one of the two. So in looking at this, I believe that we can multiply this by a number to get to 64, and that number I think is 16. Yes, 16. So 16 times 3 is going to give us, let's see, this will be 64, and 16 times 3, that's going to be 8, carry 1, that's going to be 48. So we'll change this to an 8, and we'll put a 4 right here. So 48 over 64 is the same as 3/4, right? When we add that together, we get 57 over 64. All right, now let's bring that back down. I'm just going to simplify by writing that here. 57 over 64. I can get rid of this. There we go. Now that we've got that in there, we can complete this square. And we already know what this is going to be. It's going to be 3/8 times 3/8, right? So we are going to say x plus 3/8 squared equals 57 over 64. So when we unsquare this side, we have to unsquare this side. So x plus 3/8 is equal to the plus or minus square root of 57 over 64. All right, we'll move this up a little bit. So x plus 3/8 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 57 over the square root of 64 is 8. So we can say 57 over 8. Now we're going to subtract this from both sides. X is going to be equal to negative 3/8 plus or minus square root of 57 divided by 8. Let's see if we can do anything else with that. And that's it. So that's how we would complete the square to get that answer. All right, let's do 58.2. Let's clear this page. So we have 5x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. And we have to complete the square. So the first thing we're going to do is 5x squared minus x equals 2. Let me make that better too. And then we're going to divide everything by 5. So we have x squared by itself minus 1/5 x equals 2/5. So we're going to divide this by 2 by multiplying it times 1/2. So 1 over 5 times 1 over 2 equals 1 over 10. And then we square that, and that gives us 1 over 100. So we add that to both sides. We say x squared minus 1/5 x plus 1 over 100. We add that to both sides. Now over here we can just kind of make some scratch notes. And we know if we multiply this by 20, it's going to give us 100. So that's going to be 2 times 20 is 40, and 5 times 20 is 100. So 40 plus 1, that's going to be 41 over 100 on this side. So equals 41 over 100. All right, so now we have to square this up. We have to factor it. And we already know that's going to be 1 over 10. So x plus 1 over 10. Actually, it's going to be minus, sorry. It's going to be minus because we have a negative sign here. So minus 1 over 10. And that is squared equals 41 over 100. All right, when we unsquare this, we get x minus 1 over 10 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 41, and it would be the square root of 100, but we know that that's 10, so we can go ahead and just write 10. So then we add this to both sides. X is equal to 1 over 10 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 10. And that is our quadratic equation solved. All right, so remember the steps. When we have a lead coefficient that is not the unity lead coefficient, we divide everything. First, we move this over. We subtract the whole coefficient. We subtract or add depending on what the sign is to both sides. Then we divide everything by the lead coefficient number. Then we take this lead coefficient and or the second coefficient with the x term, and we multiply it times 1/2, which is the same thing as dividing it by 2. And then we square that, and that is going to be the number we put here. Then when we factor, it goes back to this number, and if this is a negative, this is a negative, right? Then we unsquare it. Remember, when we add this in, we add it to both sides. We square it, we unsquare it, or we factor it, and then we unsquare it. And when we unsquare it, this goes under the radical sign. You go ahead and reduce if you can, and it's always plus or minus. Then you take this and either add or subtract from both sides to leave x by itself, and that is your answer. And that's all we have for lesson 58. I will see you in lesson 59.